Next up in Authors and Innovators, I'm delighted that Will Herman is with us. Will is in addition to being an author, he's an entrepreneur, active angel investor, corporate director, and startup mentor for countless companies. He's started and managed 5 companies, resulting in 2 IPOs, a number of two corporate sales. He's also invested in over 80 startups and sat on the boards of more than 25 and advised hundreds more. He's also the co-author of the Startup Playbook with Raj Bhargava, a dear friend of his who's an MIT grad with over 2 decades of tech experience. Will, welcome. I'm so pleased you're here. This is just I've written about this book. I use it in my class at BC Law School. It's a terrific book that I hope all of our attendees will have the chance to get. Let's talk a bit about it. Our theme for Authors and Innovators is change makers. And so what better change, or what better way to change than to start with yourself? You start the book, Will, by encouraging introspection. Is a startup the right thing for you to do? Because it's not for everyone. How would you answer folks who say, do I need this book? Do I really want to start something up? What would you say to them?
Well, first, Larry, thanks so much for having me and your many kind words. Hopefully some of them are deserved. We'll see about that. So I think, the Hollywood version of entrepreneurship and startups has romanticized what it means to be an entrepreneur, to start a company. And it's greatly false. I mean, first of all, we all know about 9 out of every 10 startups fail. And so it's highly likely, no matter how smart you are, no matter how ready you think you are, no matter how much money you have, you're likely to fail. It's really important to understand that up front, not because it's a negative. I mean, the fact is I've done 5 myself. I've been involved with hundreds more, and failures just happen. And if you're a person who gets emotionally tied and really, really fundamentally involved, and you can't deal with that, that can be a real heartbreaker. I mean, that can really upset you. If you're a person who can go with the flow and loves change and loves taking risks and seeing, the output of all of their efforts, regardless of success or failure, then it's a reasonable thing to give a try. But if you're out there to make money, if you're trying to make money by doing a startup or get fame or something like that, you'd probably be better off working for a large company somewhere.
Well, it's blunt and direct, as is most of the advice in this terrific book. Well, how do you know if an idea has legs, Will? What do you and Raj tell folks? How do you know if it's a good idea or not?
Yeah, well, we spend a lot of time on this in the book. Raj and I basically believe that ideas are just not important, and they're important to the extent that if your idea is to do the same thing that 500 companies before you have done,
right.
that's a problem. That's then it's going to really impact your ability to be successful. But we would take a good team with solid execution with a poor idea. That is one that's been done before or really doesn't stand on its own, before we take a good idea with a poor team with mediocre execution. It's not the idea that makes successful startups. It's the execution of an idea that makes a successful startup.
So if someone's going to talk to you or Raj, you're saying it's the person. You're trying to make an assessment about whether that person has got the it factor to be an entrepreneur. How do they figure out pricing and markets? What's the shorthand in your head, Will, if you say, look, I can determine, and having talked to you and having read the book, I can pretty much determine where this is going to go in about 5 minutes. What do they say in that 5 minutes to get someone like you, who's an experienced advisor, investor, entrepreneur, to lean in and say, oh, tell me more? What are the kind of things that you look for in that first 5 to 10 minutes?
Yeah, so there's no panacea here. There's no one indication. Even a successful entrepreneur doesn't mean, a previously successful entrepreneur doesn't mean that they're going to create a new success. The odds are better, but it's not a slam dunk by any means. We look at things as a series of indications that are either positive or negatives, and we think that there are red flags in every startup, in every team, and if there are a certain number of red flags, then it can get bad. I mean, everyone's got some. Do they have too many? And
what are they?
Well, so there's an infinite number, but the key ones are, does the entrepreneur listen to advice? They never have to take the advice, but do they listen to the advice and do they put it as part of their calculus in their company? Often there's a resistance to external advice, which is virtually always a death knell. There is the single entrepreneur who thinks that who has trouble for a variety of reasons building a startup team, a team of founders to execute on their idea or their plan. And anybody who's stubborn about doing it themselves versus building a team, almost always a problem. There are people who want to go for capital first. It's we say in the chapter in our book about whether you're cut out to be an entrepreneur or not is, we know you're skipping this chapter to go right to how to get funded chapter. It is important. It is in fact critical along the way, but it is not the most important thing you have to do.
So there's a lot in there. You talked about you want to make sure that somebody's a good listener, and you measure that by trying to figure out who their advisors are. You're concerned about anybody who's just going to be a solo founder. And you're concerned about folks who put the money piece first. Talk about some of that, because you see business plans from all kinds of people in your inbox. And they're listing, hey, I've got Will Herman as an advisor. How do you figure that out in that first 5 or 10 minutes? That even though Will might be listed, he's not terribly active. And do you have a view on board of advisors versus board of directors? What would you tell an entrepreneur who's trying to say, well, I'm hearing Will, I want to emphasize that I listen, and I want to emphasize that I've thought about the business before the dollars. How do they do that for you?
Yeah, so I think that's a super good question. If somebody says, oh, I have XYZ as an advisor on, well, let's not even put it as an advisory board kind of thing. I'd say, what have you learned from them? And it's just as simple as that. And I don't have to know the person to know that what they've learned is being reported. Oh, yeah, well, I learned my original idea was not going to attract customers because X, Y, or Z. Okay, that's a good piece of feedback. If they really have that person on their as part of their team, then and they're using it as a marketing ploy to get money. They've attracted someone to put a name on a piece of paper in a PowerPoint presentation. Right. That's easy to call out pretty quickly, and a lot of that happens.
And what are the things that when you ask about structure, how have you raised money? How much have you raised? What are the kind of things that you like to hear from an entrepreneur? Do you like to hear that they have bootstrapped it? Do you like to hear that they've raised a certain amount of money to attract someone to validate their idea? What are the kind of things that are good and not so good when you ask, how have you funded this so far?
So I don't know that there's any absolutes there, but because it depends, there's a lot of variables and depends on the situation. But I want to know how much, if they say, oh, my grandmother and my uncle have given me $100,000 to run with, I'll try to figure out, well, how far did you try to vet your idea before you took these poor people's money? And do they understand that the odds of your failure, as much as they love you, are really super low? And we really look at it as we believe you can take your team and your idea pretty far down the path for very low money to vet your idea and to establish something that gets close to product market fit before you go out for additional capital. And when you do that, one, it's more likely that you get capital. Two, you get to keep more of the company because you don't have to give as much away to raise capital because you're further down the road. And really the work that goes before that to get to that point is just legwork. It's hard, but it's hard only because it's active. It's not hard because it's rocket science.
Right. And do you have a view, because you and I both hear from people who say, well, I don't know. I don't have a rich uncle. I don't know any of these folks. So I'm just going to crowdfund. Is that just a version of somebody coming to you and putting the money first?
Yeah, we see crowdfunding as I mean, especially, it depends on the product you have, right? If you have a service, you can't really crowdfund it.
Right.
If you've got a consumer-oriented product, it's easier to crowdfund because people can, a broad range of people can sort of get it in their head. If you're going after an enterprise, crowdfunding probably doesn't play very well. I mean, you might find a few people who like enterprise SaaS deals or something like that if you're targeting that. It's not a great place to raise a lot of money, and you're going to right away have a cap table that's divided into a lot of little sections,
Well put.
which
Right.
down the road, other serious investors aren't going to really like. So it's sort of a last port of call. It doesn't mean, hey, it's, the money's green. If you're in the US, the money's all
Right.
green. So if you need it, go for it. But it's not the first place I would go. And it's hard to raise real capital that way. It's very small dollars.
Right. And so the cap table matters. Let's go to that. Will, are there things that you, and I know you advise in the book, you and Raj have some thoughts around allocating equity. So let's stick on this cap table. What are the kind of things, and I do want people to read the book, but what are the kind of things that you would advise entrepreneurs who are listening to us now to think about if they are allocating capital among founders, and also saying, I'm going to do that spreadsheet that you and I have both seen that really assumes 10 levels of financing and tells me how much I'm going to own at the end of it. What do you tell them about cap tables and that exercise in futility, in my view?
Oh, yeah. This may be one of the top reasons that startups fail, the allocation of equity between founders. It's a killer. It trips up a lot of people. And by the way, if it's done well, it is a positive sign for people who will fund you. Like if investors look at your cap table post, pre-funding cap table and how you've divided equity among the founders, and it's a logical, well thought out thing, it'll look positive because you've made some of the hardest decisions you make as a founding team already, and you've shown that you can handle that stress. We look at it. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it, but we think that we don't know how to take the stress out of it. We don't know how to take the pain out of it. But what we do believe is that there's too much thinking of the current time when equity is divided. And what you really want to do is put yourself out a couple of years looking back, if you can possibly do this. And you can say, who has added what level of value to the company 2 years from now? So, because you're not rewarding for now, you're rewarding for actually not 2 years, probably 10 years from now, because even if you're successful, exits don't generally happen for a decade. Something important to keep in mind if you're cut out to be an entrepreneur, this is not a 2-year run. This is a minimum of a 10-year run if you're successful in the first place. So if you look right away, it could be one of the team has the original idea. But as we talked about, ideas really aren't that important. And so sometimes we see companies, the founder that has the original idea, gets the lion's share of the equity. And really, sometimes they're not going to be the person or the people who actually do the execution to make it super valuable. So that needs to be taken into account. The one thing we know that is a red flag and is a really bad signal is when you have a team of founders and you've just King Solomon'd it. You've basically taken the equity and
Right.
divided it by the number of people you have.
Yeah.
Never works. You could look this up. We have stories in the book about it.
I agree.
Long list of founding teams who look back and say, "Oh my God, biggest mistake I made.
What did I do?"
Yeah,
Right.
You can't divide evenly. People are in different situations. They will add different things to the company, and you have to form the way ultimately the value add is for each of the founders. It's hard. We're not trying to make it sound simple. It's super hard, but you have to think to the future, not to the past.
Yeah, and you and Raj do a great job. And I won't spoil it, but that's one of the main reasons to buy this book. Because I think, Will, what you did in the book is you tell it through stories. It's really hard to say, do these 5 things and you're good. I think you learn, so many entrepreneurs and so many advisors and investors learn from these kind of challenges and these kind of mistakes. Well, what about outside advisors, board members? Should they get a piece too?
So I'm not a big fan of advisory boards. Let's start there. I think advisory boards look great on paper. You pull together some luminaries, some people with good advice. Maybe you give them a little stock. You don't give them cash generally. And they're very active for a short period of time. They peak and then they fall off. And it's just human nature. There's nothing to keep them in the game. The perceived value of the stock wanes very quickly, so they're not doing it for compensation after the initial hit. And so a CEO or whomever is responsible for the board of advisors needs to be very active. My view, my sort of draconian view of advisors is engage them, suck all the information you can out of them as quickly as you possibly can, and then move on to new advisors. As an advisor myself, I love that idea. I'm really going to be able to teach you, 80% of everything I know in a relatively short period of time. You won't know it in detail. You won't have experience behind it, but you can get a lot of information pretty quickly. Now, boards of directors, those people have skin in the game. They have a fiduciary responsibility that they agree to, and if they have any experience, they understand. Those people are more tied for the long term, and you will compensate them more, but you'll get more out of them in the long term. I'm not saying you should have a big board of directors. Generally speaking, when you get financing, you're going to have to take more directors on. So you want to keep it good. But we're huge proponents of bringing in one single strong, independent outside board member super early. In fact, before you get funding makes it a lot easier if they're good at what they do. It's super valuable. They become the grease in the skids between the venture capitalists or the investors in general and the founding team. They become very close advisors, and you can keep them almost as an operational part of your team. We really like that model, and you can go to 2 if that makes sense if you've got that opportunity.
Such great advice. And the distinction that you made between advisors and directors is something I emphasize with folks all the time. I think you're right that my own view is that the board of advisors works when you have kind of a specialty product where you want that credibility, maybe medical device or something like that. But beyond it, I'm with you. You want folks who have skin in the game and can add credibility to the entrepreneur's vision. There's a whole piece in here, you spend a lot of time, and it's certainly, again, really important for entrepreneurs to read this part of the book. You start with, well, now you've got the capital. How do you scale? Without revealing too much in the book, because I want people to read it, Will, what would you tell folks, now that you've got the money, here's some quick advice about scaling and the things you should be thinking about now that you have to scale?
Well, scaling really is about, in technical products anyway, in IT products, software, and other consumer electronics and so forth, is really driven by people. It's very difficult to scale if you don't have the fuel to do it. That is the capital to make it happen, and you don't have the network to bring in all of the right people. So when you've gone from some initial success, maybe some funding as part of that initial success, a little bit of good feedback on product market fit, then the scaling requires more people. And this is another place where startups often fail. They start to bring on the second level of people. The founding team is tight, it's working together well, can have an argument and resolve the argument. And then they bring in outside people and they're not able to either find them because they don't have the networks to do it, or hire the right people. And the opportunity cost in missing hiring the right people is huge, because you bring on somebody, it takes you 6-7 months to figure out that they're not the right person for the job. Now you're not only don't have the right person, and if you miss 6 to 7 months of productivity, but now you got to look for another person, which is going to take months. So building that team is the most important part of scaling. You want an extension of the founding team, not overlap, because you can't afford overlap. You want to extend the founding team, add more skills, add more networks, really critical, add more difference in behavior and resilience to the team. By then, you know the strengths and weaknesses of the team. Now you want to add to that instead of just augmenting it.
Excellent advice. And Will, is there anything now that we're in the pandemic that you would say is kind of a gloss as a result of these unprecedented times that we're living through on the advice you've given? Has the pandemic changed any of the advice in any way that you and Raj have imparted to folks here?
Yes, and the book is pre-pandemic, so this unfortunately isn't covered. Well, I should say the magnitude of this isn't covered. We think that that hiring, because the team, in the end, we believe the team is going to make you successful or not, and obviously the culture you lay on top of the team. Hiring people without seeing them face to face, without getting their body language. I mean, video is helpful, but it's not perfect at it. So hiring the right people, managing those people once they're on board, bringing them up to speed, infinitely harder. I mean, any study on behavioral dynamics will show you that communication drops to the square of the distance. It's just a monstrous problem, and you have to work extra hard to fill it. It's not to say it can't be done, but you have to work extra hard to fill it. And that's the same with customers. If you have a direct sales model as part of your company, well, now it's really hard. You can't get on a plane. You can't go see the customer. Especially if you have face-to-face direct selling, or you have application engineers that need to be on site to install and bring up to speed. But even something earlier, like determining your marketing plan and product market fit, you're trying to get people to give you time online so you can understand if you've got the product that will meet their needs and something they'll pay for. All the remoteness adds a layer of difficulty that didn't exist before. All the process is the same. It just will take more time, more energy, more effort to make it work well.
Terrific. Will, Herman, thank you so much. The book is The Startup Playbook. And Will, you've got a website or two that you could direct people to for additional resources, don't you?
Yeah, just go to startup-playbook.com. That's the source for everything. You can even download a free chapter to check it out.
Excellent. Will, thanks for joining Authors and Innovators, and hope everyone enjoys this book.
Thanks so much, Larry. Really appreciate the time.